Aim is possibly one of the most important mechanics in Valorant. We all have to do it. Some of us do it better than others, but one thing is for sure. Everyone has to get better at aiming if they want to rank up. Now, we know that YouTube is already heavily saturated with guides on this topic, so we're here to change the landscape for it. In this video, we're going to be going over what aim is as a mechanic, how to train it, and we'll even debunk myths about aiming so you can focus on what's truly important. Now, if I can save you the time that you would have had to have spent scouring the web for the thousands of aim guides that you'll see telling you all the same stuff, that's a success to me. Now, before we get into the meat and bones of today's topic, though, we have to explain what aiming is and why it's important. The importance of aiming is honestly really simple. The better your aim is directly impacts how often you're able to turn an unfavorable gunfight back into your favor. You can basically cheat the game depending on how good your aim is. And think about it this way. If you can shoot your enemies before they can shoot you, you're gonna win. By improving your aim, you're gonna in turn win a lot more gunfights than you probably shouldn't have gotten away with. Now, there's a ton of strategy involved in Valorant, but all of that goes out the window if you can't land your shots. All of the strategy in the game is based around the core fact that you should be able to land your shots when you need to. That's why aim is so important, because if you can't aim, your strategy just doesn't even matter. In this video, we're diving into the techniques that you need to practice to improve your aim, but there's so much else that goes into being an aim god that we just simply can't cover in one video. That's why we've gone ahead and created an additional hour-long masterclass that teaches you everything there is to know about aiming in Valorant. Now, in this course, we're going to teach you the best habits pro players follow, how you can easily improve your crosshair placement quickly, and also how you can make it even more difficult for your opponents to land their shots as well. We're going to teach you everything that goes into becoming an aim and movement god so that you can skip the part where you look like a bot and get to the part where you're fragging out like a legend. Now, on top of all of this, we also include 60 additional courses on things like agents, maps, game sense, and even courses showcasing players just like you ranking up out of the depths of hell, and then all of the advice they receive to do so as well. Our library never stops growing, which means that nobody can possibly compete with how good our service is to help players rank up. In fact, we're so confident in that we offer a rank improvement guarantee. So if you don't rank up, you don't pay. We know, that sounds ridiculous, but check it out and you won't be disappointed. We're even offering a discount if you use the link below. Let's get back into the video though. Now, let's talk about aiming as a whole here. Aiming is a core fundamental that actually has a lot of smaller fundamentals that go into it. Target swapping, tracking, crosshair placement, reaction times, and movement are small but important subsets of aiming. All of these come together to create a player's ability to move their crosshair around the screen with speed and precision. By truly understanding the facets of aiming and also understanding where you're weak as an aimer, you can put forth a better and more efficient path to your full potential. But remember, the more rounded you are at each of the subsets of aiming, the better you are as an aimer. Once you get proficient in each facet of aiming, you're going to be able to flick faster, track smoother, and pre-aim angles that don't even exist. Each facet of aiming is a pillar that holds up your aim together as a whole, so perfecting them will increase your potential and skill dramatically. You need to have each of these skills dialed in. You're only as strong as your weakest link, so make sure your weakest link is pretty strong. So now that we know what makes up the mechanic, let's talk about the major subsets and explain how we do them and why. Flicking is easily the coolest one on this list. Flicking is a snappy correction that happens in an instant, resulting in a flashy and quick kill. Now, even though flicking may look cool, it's surprisingly not that difficult for a new player to pick up and become consistent at this skill. Two things to keep in mind is that flicking is easier when you add in crosshair placement, and with the help of crosshair placement, you don't have to move your crosshair nearly as far to get the kill. There's two types of flicking: macro flicking, which is a large correction to the target, and micro flicking, which is a small adjustment. Macro flicking is generally done by utilizing your arm to get onto the target. This flick is usually done when your crosshair placement is a little off or when you get surprised by an enemy. Micro flicking is usually performed with your wrist, as it's more precise. It usually happens when your crosshair placement is near an opponent already, so you only really require a small adjustment. Now, a good way to look at flicks are less of an instantaneous kill and more of a controlled linear path from point A, where you're aiming, to point B, the enemy player. Contrary to what many players might think, macro flicks are a player rapidly adjusting to the target in one arm motion and then quickly micro-correcting using their wrist. The second factor is key, as many players just believe the best players instantly flick onto their target, but consistently we see that their goal with a large flick is to land as close to their target as possible, so that way when they do micro-correct, it's a very simple step. Now, a lot of people have problems with flicking because they're trying to flick much too fast and land directly on top of their target. Now, when you're flicking, it's more important that you practice the correct methods rather than you do it as fast as possible. Prioritize accuracy over speed when you're learning how to flick and make sure that you're following a direct path towards your target. And speed is just going to come with time once you get the reps in. Instead of focusing only on speed, find how you can comfortably move your crosshair from point A to point B, and after you've done this a few times, bring in the speed. Make sure you're using your strong position on the mouse pad while you're doing this too. Now, what we mean by strong position is whatever position on the mouse pad you're most comfortable from should be where you have it positioned at all times. If you practice from your strong position on the mouse pad, replicating and doing what you're practicing in actual games will be that much easier. When you're playing the game, you'll naturally have a position on your mouse pad that you're strongest in. This means that when you're moving around the map, clearing angles, and just playing the game, you'll naturally move your mouse away from what is your default strong point. What resetting your aim does is it allows you to not only prepare and put your mouse in the optimal position for the peak, but it'll allow you to prepare yourself mentally to peak the angle. Now, this goes hand in hand with pre-aiming, which is another facet of aiming. By taking this split second to position your mouse well and mentally prepare, you increase your odds of winning the coming gunfight exponentially, and the best part is it takes no practice. Mentally preparing is just an added bonus, but it'll help you be focused and ready to make any adjustments necessary. And remember, the adjustments will come much easier since you're in your default aiming position. So, we've covered flicking fairly in depth, but we have yet to talk about tracking and its importance. Tracking is the act of placing your crosshair on the opponent and following them as they move. Tracking is usually done with your arm on quick-moving opponents, but on opponents that aren't moving very fast, it's oftentimes done with your wrist. Tracking is super important due to the nature of Valorant. Got a Raze satcheling over your head? Just track them. Have Jet updrafting in your face? Tracking has your back. The biggest issue players usually have with tracking usually comes from sensitivity issues. If your sensitivity is too low, you won't be able to keep up with the target. If it's too high, you'll generally just have an issue staying on the target. Take some time to go into the range and track the moving bots. If you're having trouble staying on the bots for either of those reasons, play around with your sensitivity. The other main issue is people relying more on predicting where their opponent is rather than actively relying on their skill with tracking. Now, I can understand how that may be confusing, but if you've played Valorant, you have a decent sense of how players move when they're on your screen. This means that for a lot of players that don't practice their tracking often, they're going to opt to predict the movement of the enemy player and allow them to walk into their crosshair. Most players will simply do this instinctually, and it happens all the time. You're basically recruiting the help of your movement reading abilities to take over instead of your tracking. So let's take a look at a pro aim analyst outlook on this topic.
So really often when he was taking a duel with easy strafing targets, he was relying too much on the prediction. He was assuming that the guy will stop at some point or that he will do a long strafe. So he was kind of positioning his cursor in front of the guy, waiting for the guy to go into his crosshair. It's like a very common problem that people have at times, that they kind of like, instead of like reading the target motion, they kind of like place their crosshair in the hopes that the target will go into their crosshair, or they start to spray. Like in CSGO it's like more common that they spray. In Valorant it's more like they kind of like rush the process, or they even stay still with the crosshair trying to kind of like aim with the movement.
In this video, Minigod, a pro aim analyst, points out the player's movement reading skills. Movement reading skills are absolutely essential, and we aren't denying that. But let's all agree that Minigod is correct here in saying that the player's movement reading skills were causing him to lose some gunfights. He was over-relying on his movement reading skills and under-relying on his actual mechanical skill and mouse movements. This is an issue that arises in every single player that plays Valorant. You see it all the time with the pop and swing. When a player moves in a way that players aren't generally used to, it completely throws them off. This is due to the fact that every player has some sense of movement reading. The more you play the game, the more you're used to players doing certain kinds of movements. When a player like Poppin comes into the scene with erratic movement, players even at Radiant struggle to adjust due to the fact their movement reading skills tend to take over fairly often. This causes them to panic, get confused, miss, or just frantically try to adjust to the target. And by understanding what movement reading is, you can therefore practice your aim in areas you may be lacking. This will in turn help pick up the slack in scenarios where your movement reading just won't work. Believe me, it's a great skill to have. You want movement reading, and it comes passively when you play the game. But you need not rely on only your movement reading. It does make aiming easier, definitely, but there are times when you need to take things into your own hands. When a player is 80 strafing you or wide swinging you, you better hope you're able to hit the target rather than pray and predict their movements. And if you're looking to use movement to your advantage in gunfights, our Master in Minutes movement course is going to teach you how to do that in under 20 minutes. We've talked about flicking and tracking, but we still have crosshair placement. Crosshair placement is having your crosshair at head level for wherever you expect the opponent to be. This is important, so when you peek into the enemy, you only have to make a tiny adjustment to get your crosshair on the target. Sometimes, you won't even have to adjust it at all. To use crosshair placement effectively, remember to always keep your crosshair at head level. This is the key to crosshair placement. But what's cool about it is that by having this concept of crosshair placement, it in turn helps your flicking and your tracking. If you peek an angle and you're close to the target, all you have to do is micro flick, which is much easier than a macro flick. Also, if you peek the angle and the enemy's running in the open, you can apply your tracking fairly easily if your crosshair is near the opponent. The issue players tend to have with crosshair placement is due to the fact they either have a floating crosshair or that they're not pre-aiming angles. A floating crosshair is when you're not actively ready to peek something, your crosshair tends to wander around the screen or not really move at all. When you're playing Valorant, almost any angle can potentially be dangerous. It's important your crosshair is always trained not only at head level, but also at where the opponent could swing from. If you get swung and you're not even paying attention to the angle, you're usually going to lose that fight. But if you get swung and your crosshair is holding the angle as you walk up, all you have to do is stop and shoot. The next one is pre-aiming. A lot of players still don't pre-aim angles. You want to have your crosshair placed on angles that you're about to peek. Let's take Haven A site for example. If you're walking out onto Haven A site, you can very easily place your crosshair to the right side of default and hold that as you walk up. This ensures that if an enemy decides to peek from that angle, you're at least ready for them. This also means you should cut out unnecessary crosshair movements and focus only on having it in optimal positions at all times. Now, speaking of unnecessary crosshair movements, we've all seen players like this who are constantly throwing their crosshairs across the screen. This type of play, it's just not good. Let's take a look at what Shazam has to say about it.
Comments are roasting me, bro. They're saying I got a slow aim.
Nice. Ooh.
Just because I'm not fucking doing this. 20 thanks for the time. It's not flashy.
Keep up.
They don't flick around, bruh. It's good crosshair placement. Makes the game so easy. You just put your crosshair where it needs to be, and then you just click. One more on site. Bro, that guy deserved to die though. Like, no, that is busted.
Oh fuck yeah.
Guy's on site, bro. He's like, just click. Put your crosshair where it needs to be, and you just click.
Ooh, he's in the
Full
tower.
blind, full blind headshots me. There's a Deagle killer.
One enemy remaining.
Fucking click, dude. Easy. It's not flashy, but it's easy.
Now, this is a very simple concept to grasp, but there are definitely a lot of players that struggle with it. Taking your time, sure, it may not be as flashy, but it'll net you way more kills in the long run. Far too often, we see players at every rank with a maxed out sensitivity doing a 180 with a single small correction of their mouse. And while this may look extremely cool sometimes, it's very difficult to play like this while maintaining a consistent level of aim. Shazam may be talking about this in a pretty lighthearted manner, but it rings true in the Valorant playbase. Unnecessary mouse movements are killer when it comes to actual aim improvement. So far, all our cracked out players swinging everything and flicking everything, we see you, and we believe in you. But the best way to do it is to take your time, improve, and rely on your crosshair placement and aim fundamentals to get you to the point TenZ is at currently. So, drop that sensitivity, focus on resetting your aim before gunfights, and understand your movement reading and aiming fundamentals. With time, you're going to start to master your aim and climb the ranks rapidly, and we can guarantee it. We like to take notes from our pro players. They're playing at the highest level for a reason. There's always so much to learn when you watch players that have truly pushed the limits of their personal potential. In this segment, we're going to be analyzing just what makes a pro player's aim so hypnotizing to watch. We'll also break down what subsets of aiming they're taking advantage of in every gunfight. And believe us when we say this, pros by all means are insane aimers, but usually the reason for this is due to their fundamentals. For our first clip, we're going to be taking a look at Shazam, who expresses just how impactful fundamental aiming truly is. If we slow it down, take a look at where Shazam is aiming. He aims directly in between the two angles he can get swung from. This makes it so whichever angle he gets swung from, he can react to both with ease. The jet peeks him first, and he misses just barely, but his crosshair is in a good position already. This means that all he has to do is take his time and correct with a small micro flick. The second he gets this kill, he instantly puts his crosshair on the next angle he could be swung from. A very similar scenario plays, and he misses the first shot and tracks to the head of the Phoenix for the second kill. The next kill is all crosshair placement and holding the angle to wait for the Omen to swing him. The final kill, he tries to get aggressive, but he remembers his crosshair placement fundamentals and nails it. And as he works his way up to the angle, his crosshair is offset just enough so that if Sova swings him, he's gonna be ready. As he pushes in for the Sova, this exact scenario happens and Shazam is ready. Please note that this entire clip is Shazam utilizing the power of crosshair placement to make his aim better. By having his crosshair at optimal positioning, he can easily make very small adjustments to come out on top in these gunfights. Shazam highlighted excellent tracking and prediction in this clip. His mechanical skills, combined with his movement reading, allowed him to track the first two kills very easily without having to flick really hard at all. This wasn't the flashiest clip either, but you can tell he has his fundamentals dialed in insanely well. You too can get results like this with practice and consistency. Let's look at something a little bit flashier now and pick it apart slowly. Let's look at Victor's quick ascent ace. This ace beautifully highlights just where aim can get you when combined with good game sense. You can see he gets a scan from his Sova onto the enemy player in tiles. All he needs to do here is wait for them to swing into his crosshair. From there, Victor decides to re-challenge mid after using his nade to force them into worse angles. He immediately lands a beautiful micro flick onto the enemy Raze player. Victor continues to challenge and spots the enemy jet out. Looking for a kill here, Victor scans the field. Once Victor spots out the opponent, he hits a small but important micro flick onto their jet player. From here, he's aware he's being shot at from tiles. And take one look and notice how direct and deliberate this reaction is once he realizes the Sova's presence. He turns to face the enemy, steadies his aim, pre-aims the Sova through the box, and wide swings them all in a few quick but meaningful movements. This lands him a fairly easy kill on the enemy, and from here, Victor clearly is going to go for the ace. And who wouldn't in this situation, honestly? The bloodlusting Raze player immediately swings down Catwalk, trained on one of the only places the enemy Cypher could be. Victor aims down sight, and once the Cypher swings, he makes a rapid but concise micro flick to the opponent's head. This clip was perfectly played, aim-wise and game sense-wise. He used his pre-aiming and small adjustments really well in synergy with the information he had already gathered throughout the round. Hats off to you, Victor. This is the pinnacle of what can be achieved with deliberate practice and a clear example of exactly what you can achieve if you really dedicate yourself to it. But how exactly do we get there? Well, first, let's acknowledge the difference between a practice and a warm-up. All a warm-up is getting yourself ready to hop in and play the game. Practice, on the other hand, is focusing on areas that you are weak in order to improve those weak areas. Practice is more deliberate with a really clear goal. Bad at flicking? Train it. Bad at pre-aiming? Train it. An NBA player wouldn't go to the gym right before playing in a match, just as you shouldn't be aim training intensively before playing ranked. So how long should you practice for then? Well, that all honestly just depends on the person, truly. But anywhere from 15 minutes up to even an hour is going to do just fine. You can go longer, just know that you risk injury or wrist and hand strain if you overdo it, so exercise caution, especially if you're new to aim training. And now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about practice. To start practicing, you need to understand your weak points. Do you overflick or underflick a lot? Are you constantly missing the rays satcheling across your screen? Are you having a hard time staying calm in aim scenarios? Answer all those questions for yourself. Whichever one you find you're the weakest in, improve upon it. And yes, before anyone asks, you can do them all at once. Just make sure you understand what you are weakest in so you can track progress and maybe even specifically practice in that area. Now there's two types of practice, condensed and blocked practice. Condensed practice is when you're focusing on multiple aspects of your aim and running the scenarios at a rapid pace. This is a bit more of an all-in-one for training. Blocked practice is picking certain areas and practicing them for a set time to ensure you're practicing areas you may be extremely lacking in. It's also easier to adjust a blocked practice to better suit your needs and spend more time on your weak areas. Now, we're not going to sit here and debate which is better, rather than just lay out your options for your practice. But all this information is going to apply with aim trainers as well. So all of our Aim Labs enthusiasts, we're here to keep you informed also. Taking a step back into Valorant though, we're greeted with a few options for practice. Deathmatch and the range. Deathmatch is really good for putting yourself into realistic scenarios for aim that you may encounter when you're actually playing the game in ranked. The range is great for focusing on raw mouse movement improvement and getting comfortable moving that beautiful crosshair across your screen. We're mainly going to be focusing on the range since we're talking more about improving your raw mechanical skills. So let's first look at what a condensed routine would look like. We're going to throw 15 minutes at you. We're going to do a total of 3 sets, and this means 5 total exercises. The first exercise is tracking for 1 minute. Tracking the enemy is a pretty essential skill to have in a fast-paced game like Valorant. So set the bots to static and pick a target. Track this target to the best of your ability while you're moving around. Do this at different instances. This is going to help you get the fingers and hand moving for what comes next, and it'll also serve as a bit of a slowdown period in between sets. The next exercise is going to be practicing macro adjustments on a single target for 1 minute. It's important that these are somewhat large adjustments, as our next practice is going to focus on the smaller adjustments. Macro adjustments are the first part of quick but large adjustments to the enemy's head or body. The second part of quick adjustments are usually followed by a small adjustment to correct any errors you may have had in the first movement. Your goal here is to keep your crosshair on a straight path, not deviating at all from that straight path. This ensures you're making the smallest adjustment necessary. Other things you need to keep in mind are if you're struggling with over-flicking or under-flicking. If you're consistently struggling with either of them, it may be a decent sign to either raise or lower your sensitivity. Once you got that down, it's all about balancing speed with accuracy. You want to be fast, yeah, but don't sacrifice too much accuracy for speed. The more you do this exercise, the more consistent you're going to become. Now, we've talked about the first part of fast adjustments, so it's only natural that the second part, micro adjustments, is next on our list for practice. For this exercise, you want to offset your crosshair from the bot's head. Once you've done this, rapidly adjust and shoot the bot's head in one quick motion. This exercise is primarily to help you close out the kill after your large adjustment when you're in a duel. Next up, we're going to put it all together and throw in the bot challenge. We haven't been moving during any of this training as it's all static, so we're going to remain that way for this next portion. Do whatever speed you feel most comfortable with, but you need to focus on your accuracy and your speed. If you're not hitting targets really often, turn it down a notch if you can, and once you're confident on a speed, turn it up to the next level. Do this for at least 1 minute. Finally, for our last exercise in the set, we're going to do the bot challenge once more, but this time we're going to throw in movement. You put everything together with moving your mouse. Now, throw in the keyboard. Strafe around as you shoot the bots and make your adjustments, and you should be able to feel confident in your aim while moving and strafing. And once you finish this, restart from the first exercise. You can do this as many times as you want, but we recommend at least 3 times for a mild routine. Also note that you can change this however you see fit. If you prefer to do more movement drills, do the last 2 sets while incorporating movement into them. It's important that you at least complete the first set while standing still, as you can focus primarily on your aim without distracting yourself by throwing in too many things right away. Also, feel free to change this up by adding in your own exercises or other exercises you're interested in trying out. We're here to help provide the building blocks for training. What you do with them after that is honestly up to you. And speaking of building blocks, let's share a quick block routine for all of you that prefer that type of training. It'll be the same exercises, but it's going to be with a little bit of a different layout. I personally prefer block training as it helps me focus on one thing for an extended period before moving on to the next mechanic. So let's allot the same 15 minutes. We're simply going to change the time spent for each exercise here. We're instead going to be doing it all at once rather than doing one set before repeating as the last training suggested. It's going to look like this: 3 minutes of tracking, 3 minutes of macro adjustments, 3 minutes of micro adjustments, 3 minutes of bots, followed by 3 minutes of moving bots. Very simple, but very effective. When you're first starting out, or even just an intermediate aimer, it's smart to not vastly overcomplicate things for no apparent reason. And we hope these building blocks for creating and maintaining your own routine is going to help you skyrocket your improvement. So now that we've talked about everything you need to know about aiming and improving upon, let's debunk some common myths that people tend to bring up pretty often right here on YouTube. Have you ever heard this advice? Don't change your sensitivity or your peripherals, it'll mess with your muscle memory. That right there is fake news. Now, the thing is, there's no proof that swapping your settings around or changing your peripherals have a long-term negative effect on your gameplay. Muscle memory is a factor, yes, absolutely. But it's honestly a negligible factor at best. Your aim is not all muscle memory. Muscle memory in esports is different from sports due to the fact you're aiming your mouse and using different muscles and joints for so many different actions while playing. The actions are just far too precise for muscle memory to ever be a factor. You're going to be flicking to different angles and distances consistently. You can't memorize and perfectly replicate a mouse movement. There's so many factors thrown at you just consistently playing this game. Now, these factors include things such as humidity and moisture on your mouse pad, how your hand and wrist are feeling on that day, how mentally capable of aiming you are for that moment, and honestly just a laundry list of more. So no, don't be afraid to swap things up. Our next myth is that aim trainers are pointless. Aim trainers serve their purpose as a supplement to your primary game. Aim trainers such as Aim Labs or Kovacs are tools to isolate certain scenarios that may be difficult to isolate. These tools are out there to speed up progression in areas that you might struggle to progress by simply using the range or deathmatch. They're not useless. They serve a purpose, but they should be used supplementary and not as your only source of aim training. Now, this is one we've all heard before, that talent trumps all. We're here to tell you that anyone can be an amazing aimer, including you. All it takes to be a good aimer is understanding the path to improvement. What separates a diamond aimer with 1,000 hours and a radiant aimer with 1,000 is how they're using their time. Yes, some players will naturally be more talented than others in FPS games, but in the majority of cases, it really all comes down to how time is being used. The diamond aimer may play 12 hours of deathmatch and static bots a week. The radiant aimer, he'll spend his time finding his flaws and polishing them. The radiant aimer will spot out his flaws much easier and know the path to take for the fastest improvement. We firmly believe that any player can be an Immortal 3 or even a Radiant aimer, and all it takes is a little direction and good time management.
In order to win in Valorant, you need to die less and make better trades. And the only way to do that is to have perfect positioning. A bad position and you're going to get caught out and die to enemy utility or double swinging, but a perfect position is going to allow you to take advantage fights and easily disengage when you're in trouble. Now, most people want you to tell them exactly where to stand on every single map, but the problem is position is fluid. It can change due to a number of different factors, including weapons, economy, enemies, agents, your agent, maps. There's a million things that can change positions. So instead, we can give you the golden rules to follow, and if you follow these, you will have a great position. So we're going to break it all down. Now, keep in mind, if you're looking to climb, by far the most important thing for you to master is the fundamentals. This goes far beyond things like crosshair placement and counter strafing. It includes things you probably don't even realize you're doing wrong, like peeking, spacing with teammates, or even just choosing where to stand. That's why if you want to consistently drop 30 plus kills in your games, you need our new Aim God Masterclass that teaches you everything from the fundamentals to every advanced concept that you could possibly need to climb. Right now, we offer a rank improvement guarantee, so if you don't climb, you don't pay, and we know it sounds insane, but our number one priority is to be the standing name in the community for years to come, and the best way to do that is to create the best product we can. Check it out using the link down below. Now, the first golden rule for positioning is undoubtedly natural cover, and this is just the general areas on the map that deny abilities, fire, and information. So any wall, any corner, this is natural cover, and of course, the harder the surface is to be wall banged, the better the cover is. So some corner or boxes can't be shot through at all, and that's a much better piece of cover than the freaking paper mache walls on Ascent. Some cover is better than nothing, and you're still going to be able to deny information from the enemy behind them, but it's not going to protect you in the same way than a corner of a wall that can't be shot through. Now, it's a good idea that when you're not actively engaging a target that you know their location or you're swinging a very specific angle, you should be going from one piece of cover to the next. Not only do you hide your information about where you are, but you give yourself the opportunity to disengage. How many times have you started a gunfight and you know that right off the bat, your spray just completely got away from you? Well, if you have a piece of cover, you can easily step behind, reset, and then either use an ability, re-engage, or just dip out just completely. But if you are playing in the open, you have no choice but to all in, full spray, and freaking pray, and most of the time, that's not going to work at all. Basically, what natural cover gives you is options. It allows you the flexibility to commit to a fight or disengage from a fight based on advantage, disadvantage, and a number of different factors. Even if you're confident and think you could win the 1v1, what if your opponent pops an ultimate or an ability that basically completely exposes you? Like a dart comes really high and you can't easily shoot it, and you're gonna get scanned. Now, if you're close to a piece of cover, it's no big deal. They know where you are, but you can disengage from the fight and reset. But if you're not near a piece of cover, you're basically a sitting duck and you're gonna die for free. Now, a lot of people might ask, what is an off angle? And an off angle oftentimes is a place that doesn't fit near a natural form of cover, because naturally people are gonna play near cover, and a lot of the common angles are strong positional angles that do play near cover. And when you take an off angle, you're sacrificing that cover for unpredictability. And this can be strong, but you are sacrificing so many other benefits of natural cover when you take an off angle. And a lot of times, if you're not climbing, it's because you're not sticking good or well enough to the fundamentals, and you're just forgoing all the rules and trying to justify it by saying, oh, well, I'm taking an unexpected angle. You're not really doing that if you do it all the time and you're dying all the time. all you're doing is not playing good fundamentals and calling it an off angle. Nail down the fundamental cover and places to hold first, then apply off angles when appropriate, and they're going to work better as you go up against better opponents that know the proper angles people should be staying in, and they are not just wide swinging every angle anyways, so your off angle isn't really getting any extra value. It only just has a huge amount of weakness compared to more traditional solid angles that play around cover. Now next up, as far as positioning is concerned, we got to talk about trading, and it's really important that you are also cognizant of where your teammates are playing and how they're playing, because that can make a position stronger or weaker. If you're playing a position that if you die, none of your teammates can see you and trade you, it's far weaker because you don't have those resources of your team to follow up and get that trade. But if you're playing in a position that makes sure that if you die, your teammates can actually trade very easily, and if they die, you can trade very easily, it makes the position far stronger regardless of where y'all are standing, because at the very least there's some value attached to the positions, right? This is also super important to where if you're challenging somebody like in a 2v1 situation, if both of you swing the person at the same time, but you do it from angles to where the only way the enemy team could kill you both is by hitting a ridiculous hard flick, right? They have to hit one in front of them and then one to like the direct right of them or even behind them. The positioning of the engage makes it almost impossible for the enemy to clutch up, and that's something else to consider when deciding how to fight and how to trade. How does the position of you and your teammate make it either easier or harder for the enemy to clutch up the 1v2? This leads us to the next golden rule, and that's effective range. Whether your weapon is effective from a certain range can change whether or not that position is good or bad, because just because a place is protected doesn't mean it's strong. You also need to be effective in that location, in that angle, and if you're playing a really long sight line with natural cover, but you got a freaking Bucky, it doesn't matter, right? So your weapon's strength in range can make a position stronger or weaker, and if you can play to the maximum differential between your weapon and your opponent's weapon, the stronger your position will be. Like for whatever reason, let's say that you have an operator and you know that there's an opponent that is only using the judge on the enemy team. This automatically makes any close range space positionally weaker and any long distance open space stronger, because your gun is going to be better at those ranges. You're going to be able to control the engagements a lot better, and you're making the opponent's weapons weaker. And by understanding what the enemy is likely to play based on their economy, like if they have a lot of money, they're likely to buy maybe snipers or rifles, and if they have a little bit of money, they're going to buy some more eco weapons. Maybe they're going to buy shotguns on defense, or they're going to run like stingers on attack and make a rush strategy trying to close in that effective range. Understanding this is going to allow you to position better to deal with people that are trying to close in their range using their abilities, bursting out with utility, or just using the map geometry to try to get in close and fight the fights that they want to fight. But if you know what they want to do, then you can constantly back up, give space, and make sure that your engagements are in the range that benefits you the most. Now, the next thing that you need to consider when trying to pick the perfect position is what information do you have about who's left alive and where they are. If you know that certain areas of the map are impossible for an enemy to exist in based on prior information, or whether or not the enemy is trying to stick the bomb or something along those lines, then you don't have to play around that position, which means where you can hold and where you can stay can basically ignore that angle, which opens up a lot of other positions that otherwise would not normally be safe without any information, because you don't know where enemies are, where they're wrapping, where they're hiding. But in certain situations, you know 100% where an enemy is, where they were last seen, how much time they have left, and this allows you to deduce what positions they could be in or where they are just 100%, which means that you don't have to play around certain areas. So if you know where an enemy is, or you know 100% where they are not, you could reposition accordingly. And something that I would always say, if you're maintaining a passive position, if something changes on the map fundamentally, then you should probably reposition if you can. So what I mean by that is if the enemies are popping ultimates, if people are dying on your side or the enemy team, ask yourself if there's some position that you can take that is better for if the enemy rotates or makes a play on you if you're holding a certain area. Just because a position was really good at the start, at the very beginning of a round, doesn't mean it's the best position after several people have died, ultimates have been used. There's no longer the explosive utility that people use right at the start of rounds to take a point, or maybe they might be rotating off, so they don't have that explosive utility anymore. So all of these factors can affect whether or not a piece of position is good or worse than it was before. Maybe there's something way better, but it's weak to like a raise, nade, jet, dash, execute. But those pieces of utility were already used. You don't have to play around them anymore. And that leads me to the last thing, which is ability use. And there are some positions that are fundamental and solid, but every time you play them, you get dumped with utility. You get flash, you get grenaded, you get killed, you get set up by the enemy team. They're doing lineups, or they're doing, you know, a combination of abilities to flush you out or kill you. And you need to pick up on the habits of enemies too when they're doing this, because if you're not playing that position and they use utility like you are, then you're just going to get value for that. You're getting value because they're using utility to clear that space, and then you're not there. But if they're not actually dumping utility there, if they're just kind of blinding onto sight and just trying to run it out and not using utility to shut down that space, well, then all of a sudden that position becomes better. So something to understand is the less you play a position, the stronger it becomes. The more you play a position, the weaker it becomes, because habits allow people to pre-use utility to shut down a certain piece of space. So if you have a really great spot that you love to play, but you play there every single freaking round, I promise you the enemies will come up with abilities to set up an unfair advantage, whether they're just triple swinging you or using a whole bunch of utility to flush you out of there. So keep that in mind, especially if you have been successful in a position multiple times in a row. Expect your opponents to mix up how they approach dealing with that space, because it's not gonna often be, we're just never gonna fight you, right? That's what you would hope. Oh yeah, you learned a lesson, you just step off, just go to the other side. They're gonna find a way to deal with you, right? They're gonna find a way because they know where you've been playing, they know the positions you're taking, and it makes it weaker by default because of that repetition. But the first type of movement that we do gotta talk about is jumping. And you're probably jumping wrong. There are actually two different jump things that you gotta know if you wanna minimize the sound you're making while simultaneously either increasing speed or making it so you gather more information. The first one is the simple silent jump spot. This is where if you're hiding behind a box on a certain site, let's say you're hiding on the back of A site on bind, if you wanna gather information, you wanna jump over the box, but if there's no one there, you don't want your sound to tell the enemies that you're there. So all you have to do is hold crouch, jump, and then let go of crouch midair. This allows you to gather that information, but then not make any sound. Super useful, and something that you should be able to do without thinking about it, so definitely start to practice it right now. The other thing with jumping that you should learn how to do is the sloped bunny hopping. If you hold shift and actually give yourself a little bit of momentum by jumping up sloped surfaces like this surface here on bind, you're going to be able to actually keep some of that momentum and go up faster while also making no sound. So you could really quickly get up to hookah without the enemy team knowing that you're going to get there quite that fast. Now, if you do mess this up though, you will be making noise, so it's really important that you practice it so you don't have to think about it anymore, but it's really useful once you do know it. The next thing that we do need to talk about is the relationship between your movement and your aim, notably counter strafing, or the lack of needing of counter strafing. You see, the concept of counter strafing is you're moving in one direction, and before you start to shoot, you tap the other direction to stop your momentum, and then you're gonna have that first shot accuracy that much faster. But in Valorant in particular, whether you just let go of the key or you tap the other key, it doesn't alter your momentum in any meaningful way, which means that you could do either or. Like, there's no penalty to counter strafe, but you don't really need to counter strafe if it's already ingrained in your muscle memory. No problem. A good percentage of pros do counter strafe, but there are also big notable aiming pros that don't, so it really doesn't matter. It's your own personal preference. That being said, especially when you're stopping and looking for an opportunity to hit somebody, one of the things that you need to do to give yourself the best chance of winning gunfights is give yourself time to shoot relative to how safe you are. And I know that doesn't make any sense, so let me explain. Basically, the longer you wait to take that first shot after you're gaining that first shot accuracy, the more likely you are to hit that shot, right? And this just makes sense. You're taking more time, you're lining it up better, you're waiting for a better moment before you shoot. This all makes sense, but oftentimes players will rush a shot right away. They'll see a target, they'll instantly get that first shot accuracy and just start throwing bullets out, even when if they would have waited just a little bit longer, they could have been more accurate. And the thing that you need to identify is, how fast do you need to shoot? As in, how under threat are you? Is that person about to shoot at you? Then you probably need to start the duel faster. But if that person is farther away, maybe they're not looking at you, or maybe they're in a situation where they're shooting at someone else and they're gonna flick to you, you have more time to take that shot, and you don't want to increase your odds of whiffing by trying to force the shot too quickly. The idea here is that every single gun duel, you are evaluating just how fast you have to shoot, and you're giving yourself as much time as you can get away with, and taking extra time when you're not under direct threat, so that you can guarantee hitting those first shots when you're first shot accurate and not whiffing because you're trying to rush those shots. Now, having great movement is going to help your aim, and having great aim is going to make your movement all that more impactful. And for everything you need to know to master these things, you got to check out the SkillCapped website, where we have an in-depth movement guide course that teaches you everything you need to know about peeking, crouch spraying, run and gun, when to do certain movement techs, and how to combine that with amazing aim. Everything you need to climb is right there, so just check it out right now in the links down below. Now, the other aim technique that we're going to talk about is actually breaking your opponent's aim by training them to a close angle and swinging wide. And this is super powerful, where you're constantly like jiggling a really tight angle, making it so that an opponent that's holding there is putting their crosshair really close to the wall because they're trying to punish your tight angle swing. And then you do something kind of obscure, like swing really wide, or if you want to do it even further, do something like slide it as neon, or even satchel super wide out, and then the enemy would have to hit a crazy wide flick in order to punish you, and their crosshair's already super close to the wall, because in general people put their crosshair like quite a bit away from the wall so that they could flick inward or flick outward. But once you show them one thing, then they're ready for that thing, and then you mix it up with something else. Super powerful to understand how you and your movement can change how an opponent prepares to take a gunfight, and you could use that against them. The next up, we do got to talk about using your movement to be evasive during gun duels. If you're in a gunfight and you have like killed one person, you're not crouch spraying, you're just taking a duel, you're shooting someone and you killed them. Oftentimes, whether you hit that small spray or you whiff it, you want to take a couple of steps to the left or the right before you reset your fire and aim. The idea here is that, one, you're going to change your position, so it's harder for an opponent to instantly trade you out, whether it's the second person or it's that first person, because you didn't kill them, you missed your shots, so that you get to reset and you make yourself harder to kill at the same time. And number two, it gives you an opportunity to reset your aim, and you're going to be more mobile while you reset your aim. Because if you just like sit there and spray, and you still have a moment before you get that first shot accuracy back after you shot anyways, so might as well make yourself harder to hit in the meantime rather than just standing there and waiting for you to get first shot accuracy back. You're gonna get absolutely destroyed. But something that a lot of people ask is, when do you crouch spray? Like, when is it actually correct to crouch and spray instead of taking bursts and then repositioning and taking bursts and repositioning over and over again? Most of the time, if you do not have a window to actually reposition and you need to spray transfer, then crouching can be actually legitimate. So as an example, you killed one person and then like a jet dashes on you or a raise comes on you out of nowhere, and you're just like, oh shit, I don't have the time to step away here because I'm gonna instantly die in this window, and I'm going to try to spray transfer them, but I don't have time to reset my first shot accuracy or anything like that, so I'm going to commit to a spray transfer and a crouch. And I would say while there are a lot of legitimate uses for crouch, most of the time people overuse crouch immensely. It's like, you're probably using crouch way too much in your gunfights, putting you in a situation where you're glued to the floor, easy to trade, and you're not really as light on your feet and capable of taking multiple gun duels at the same time as you would be if you just didn't crouch nearly as much. So keep that in mind. Now, next up, we're going to talk about jiggle peeks and jump peeks. Typically, a jiggle is like on the ground, where you're just going to really quickly wiggle a corner with your shoulder. Sometimes you're going to see the enemy, but most of the time, you're either reacting off of the mini map or or just their gunfire. You're trying to bait like an op shot, or you're trying to bait fire, so you gather information with these peaks. Now, a jump peak's a little bit different, where you're going to jump up and out, and then you're going to hold down and back in the direction that you came from when you jumped, and this is going to allow you to like peek over little surfaces, gather a little bit of information, and with this you're typically going to be able to see the enemy and gather that information visually. But I would make it clear that if an enemy knows you're there, I would not jump peek too reliably. Really good aimers and people with fast reaction time can kill you when you're jump peeking, so definitely keep that in mind as well. The next off, we do got to talk about run and gun. When is run and gun correct? Are there times when you actually should be running and gunning, or is it just something that you only do if you just don't have skill? Well, there are legitimate times where running and gunning can give you a strategic advantage, and it really comes down to this. If you have a gun that is actually strong while being mobile, and they have a gun that really wants to take very precise gunfights, then running gunning can actually be good in the right range. Like, here's an example. Let's say the enemy have a sheriff and they want to take a really specific gunfight. They're holding on a corner, they're waiting for you to peek like a rifle peek, like really precise and direct, right? But if you have like even a phantom or a specter, you don't really want to give them the fight that they want to get, right? Because they will win that fight, or they have a chance to win that fight. You would rather give them a very, very difficult fight for them to win. So that could mean completely running across the angle, creating a really close effective range, and using your gun's mobility to just destroy them, because they would have to hit very, very difficult shots, and they don't get to set up the fight in the way they really want to set up the fight. And there's other examples to this, like, you know, you're using even like a Vandal against like a Guardian or something like that. You are fine with utilizing run and gun a bit more if you're in a really close effective range. If you're up against like an Operator, most of the time you don't really want to be precise unless they've already used their shot. You would much rather take a highly mobile, hard to hit engagement from close range. So there are moments in time where run and gun can be useful, but I want to make this clear. Don't run away, pun intended, to run and gun when you can't aim. This is not the way to get better, and it's a slippery slope where if you start running and gunning against people and you're like, oh, I can actually abuse people with running and gunning, and then you're just doing it all the time. You're just running and gunning here and there and everywhere. You might even gain some rank, but you're not developing your skills, and then eventually you're going to run into players that are still going to be able to shut you down unless you only run and gun in optimal situations. And because you're running and gunning all the time, you didn't learn, you didn't improve, and now you're gonna just be stuck there where you're really not good enough to compete at that rank anymore. And yeah, you're basically gonna artificially inflate your elo for what? To just be stuck and not be able to actually climb anymore or be good enough to compete anymore at that rank? Not a great way to improve, in my opinion. But next off, let's talk about when to run and when to walk, because that's part of movement, is giving away information. And there are times when you want to just book it and run, and kind of run to the point where you're rotating, going to the other site. But it's really important that you anticipate where an enemy could be. You have that mini map with the circle. It's going to tell you how far your sound stretches, and it's important to anticipate or understand where an enemy would be based on where they were, and when you have to cut noise so that they don't know where you are. It's a balance that does take a bit of game sense, and there's going to be some trial and error because enemies could be lurking, could be rotating early. Where part of getting better is trying to min-max your time, which means that if you're walking when you actually could run with no penalty because no one could hear you anyways, you're just wasting those valuable seconds. And it's important to kind of push those bounds and experiment a bit. Even if you're going to mess up a bit, that's perfectly fine. It's still something to keep in mind. Now, the last thing is the hardest thing to master with movement, because while I've given you a lot of tips about movement in this video, a big part of movement is map knowledge and map mastery, and being able to execute a lot of these movement things while not having visual information, aka walking backwards or being blind. And you see this all the time where you're blinded and then you think you're going one place, and then when you're unblinded, you're like standing in the middle of the map and you're like, oh shit, I'm dead, right? So it's really important to master this stuff, and this is not something that's going to be easy. It's going to take time, but being able to navigate through certain areas on the map backwards so that you don't have to look and do it, or being able to navigate while you're blind, these things are going to set you up for better engagements post flashes and situations where you're going to be able to clutch up in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. Of course, the only way to get good at this is by repetition and really trying to learn the map. Don't just autopilot. Never autopilot your gameplay. Try to absorb it in so that when you think about Ascent, you like know that map as well as you know your own damn bedroom, and then you're good, right? So anyways, I hope that you learned something in this video, but if you have any questions, definitely let us know. But before you go, a quick word from SkillCapped. All right though, guys, before we wrap this up, let me tell you a little bit more about SkillCapped. So we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that. Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really works. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium Valorant guides on the internet. We add new courses every month with over 1,000 guides curated into 50 courses no one can compare. We also have a direct line of communication with subscribers in our Discord so that you can get connected immediately to some of the best players in the game who will respond to any and all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So that's gonna be all for this one today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.